Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Brent Venables, the Oklahoma Sooners, gearing up for what's going to be an extremely busy next couple of weeks on the recruiting trail. And not only does Oklahoma sit in a really good spot in this 2025 cycle, currently having a top three class in the country, I think this 2025 class could truly be special for Oklahoma and specifically at the offensive line position. And if you guys are not new to the channel, we talk about this a lot. If there's one position to make sure you're getting right at the high school level, it's the offensive line spot, especially with Oklahoma going into the SEC. That is a position that if you miss at the high school ranks, it's really difficult to address in the transfer portal. There are some other positions that if you miss at the high school ranks, you can kind of go address rather easily in the transfer portal. The offensive line position is certainly not one of those. So if Oklahoma could hit on a few of these, just special offensive linemen in this 2025 cycle, that's going to mean massive things for this Oklahoma program transitioning into the SEC. Want to dive into some of my favorite targets for this Oklahoma program, dive into some of these offensive linemen. Before we do, and as always, just want to give a massive shout out to the Oklahoma fans. It's no secret. We talk a lot about this program and the amount of support the Oklahoma fans have shown the fellas. It truly does mean a lot. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. A lot of commitments to break down for this Oklahoma program over the next couple of weeks and months. And without further ado, let's dive into this and let's start on the offensive line, where you already have an offensive tackle in Ryan Foji, who we've covered has been a riser in the rankings. He's a top 100 national prospect. And then you look at Oklahoma, they're going to be hosting for top 100 in three of their cases, five-star offensive tackles over the next couple of weeks. Want to dive into what each of these offensive linemen bring to the table. And if you're Oklahoma, you're an Oklahoma fan following the recruiting trail, if you can land two of these names that we're going to talk about and you combine that with Ryan Foji already getting locked in, that is, three high upside, high-end offensive tackles in this 2025 cycle. A lot of programs go a whole cycle without landing a top offensive tackle prospect. Oklahoma has a chance to land three guys, maybe four or five guys in this 2025 class. I think Oklahoma fans have a lot to be fired up about. Let's get into probably my favorite offensive lineman, offensive tackle in this 2025 cycle. And that's going to be Ty Haywood. And I think what makes Ty Haywood special is not only from a frame standpoint, he is probably the ideal tackle. You're looking at 6'5", 290 pounds. And although he's not 6'8", he has the arm length of a guy with a 6'8" frame. And so he has the ability to play with good leverage, play with good feet, but then have the reach of some of these ginormous tackles and put hands on opposing defensive linemen just from the frame of Ty Haywood. That's extremely special. And then you talk about Ty Haywood being a guy that we don't normally say this about prospects. He's a high floor, high ceiling kind of guy. And again, normally you're one of the other. You look at Ty Haywood and say, let's look at the floor. This is one of the most polished offensive tackles that we see in this 2025 cycle. I look at Ty Haywood and say, it's really difficult to see Ty Haywood washing out at the Power 5 level, not being a multi-year starter for this Oklahoma program. And then you look at the upside and say, this is a guy that also could be a top 10 NFL draft pick over the next couple of years. And you don't always say that with a lot of these high school prospects. It's normally one or the other. You have a high floor. You're probably not going to wash out, but you might not be a top NFL talent, or you have a ton of talent, could very well be a high NFL draft pick, but there's a chance that you kind of wash out and don't put it together at the college level. Ty Haywood checks both of those boxes. He has a high floor, high ceiling, makes him my favorite offensive tackle in this 2025 cycle. Next guy I want to talk about, Michael Fasusi, another one high on Oklahoma's board. Oklahoma's high on his board as well. I like Michael Fasusi a lot as well. You could take all four of the tackles that we're going to talk about. I'd be fired up if Oklahoma just lands any of these guys. Now, you look at Michael Fasusi and say, very similar frame. Like, this is a guy that has an ideal frame, probably not as polished as a guy like Ty Haywood. Really, really strong hands. This is a guy that when he is engaged with opposing defensive linemen, they're getting walked back. And he's a guy that can move bodies off the line of scrimmage relatively easy. He operates in space. Again, Ty Haywood Michael Fasusi. They check a lot of the boxes that you're looking for at that offensive tackle spot. Now, I think the most intriguing offensive tackle really in this whole 2025 cycle, and especially for Oklahoma fans, Andrew Babaloa, coming from the state of Kansas, obviously not playing a ton of high quality guys every single Friday night. This is, you talk about upside. Andrew Babaloa probably has the highest upside out of any single offensive tackle we see in this 2025 cycle. He's also a guy that you probably have some question marks as well. He's a former basketball player that is new to the sport of football. You can tell he was a basketball player because the movement patterns and skills for Andrew Babaloa, they're next level. I mean, he has the ideal frame, 6'6", 280, certainly going to get over 300 pounds as he gets to campus. The feet and the explosiveness, they're on another level. And this is a guy that you can tell he's still learning the sport of football. The physicality at times is a problem. He's a guy that the hand placement sometimes out of control. You can tell he's new. That's all stuff that you can teach. What you can't teach is the big frame and the athleticism that Andrew Babaloa brings to the table. He is the biggest project out of these tackles that we're talking about, but the highest upside. I would love to see him get paired up with Coach Bill B and really just get the best out of this kid over the next 3 to 4 years in Norman. As a Michigan fan, would love to see him in Ann Arbor too. One of the more exciting tackles in this class. And then the last offensive tackle I want to talk about, Lamont Rogers. And I think this is, I mean, how many programs across the country already have a top 100 national prospect in Ryan Foji locked in at the tackle spot and are legitimate contenders for 4 other premier offensive linemen in this 2025 cycle? That's what has to fire you up the most if you're an Oklahoma fan. And you look at a guy in Lamont Rogers, also slated to take an official visit in the month of June to Oklahoma. Not quite the athlete that Ty Haywood, Michael Fasusi, Andrew Babaloa are. Probably the nastiest offensive lineman we've talked about. And this is a guy at 6'6.5", 311 pounds. He just engulfs opposing defensive linemen. You talk about nasty, established in the run game, routinely moving bodies off the line of scrimmage. That's Lamont Rogers. Now, do we have question marks about what he could potentially be in pass protection? Yeah, certainly do. I think he needs to do a little body recomposition and kind of clean that up. But I look at this kid and say, big time upside. He's a former basketball player, so that makes you feel a little bit better about the movement skills. I mean, you got 4, in my mind, premier offensive tackles that will be on campus at some point during this month in Norman. You already have one in Ryan Foji locked up. Oklahoma very well could have the best offensive line class in this 2025 class if they can hit on 2 of the 4 guys that we just talked about. Next position I want to talk about is at the wide receiver spot and talk about Andrew Marsh. And I think you've seen Oklahoma really emerge as a big-time contender for Andrew Marsh. And you turn on the film with Andrew Marsh, he doesn't necessarily have the crazy track times that some of these other wide receivers, especially in the state of Texas, have, guys like DeCorian Moore. But Andrew Marsh, in terms of what he can do as a polished wide receiver, it's next level. This is a guy that just checks every single box that you want. And I said he doesn't have a track and field background that's extremely decorated. Don't get that twisted. This guy has some top-end speed. Talk about creating separation for a junior in high school. This is a wide receiver that's about as polished as it gets in terms of route running. And you're starting to see that matter the most for these wide receivers jumping up to the college level. Like, yeah, it's sweet to run in a straight line really, really fast. Can you create separation? Can you operate after the catch? And the 3 things I have noted for Andrew Marsh: separates at a high level, yards after the catch, big time at the catch point. Those are probably the 3 most important characteristics that you want in a wide receiver. Andrew Marsh, in my opinion, checks every single one of those boxes. Would love to see Andrew Marsh heading to Norman. And the last guy I want to talk about, another difference maker as a pass catcher, although a different position, Desan Brom. He'll be on campus in Norman this weekend. From the state of Kansas, it sounds like Oregon and Oklahoma are probably the 2 leaders in the clubhouse. Oregon probably given the favor to land him. I love this kid. It's so rare that you see 6'6", 235-pound tight ends have the fluidity in ball catching and pass catching feel that a guy like Brom has. And you look at it and say, you don't see him line up as an inline tight end very often, but at the 6'6" frame, 235 pounds, I have no question marks about him getting it done as an inline blocker. But you're looking at kind of just a matchup nightmare. A guy that moves like a wide receiver. People really struggle. Linebackers, safeties struggle to deal with this speed and size as he works the middle of the field. And you look at who's going after him at Joe John Finley. I think he certainly can make this happen. I think a lot of Oklahoma fans want to see more production out of the tight end position. You landed a really good tight end in the 2024 class. If you stack another one here, I'm fired up about what the Oklahoma tight end room could be. We'll cut it at that. Those are some of my favorite prospects in this 2025 class. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Going to be a busy next couple of weeks on the recruiting trail. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.